एक मिनट रुक जाओ, रेडी होने दो. चलो ये कर लेते हैं. This could be a great intro.
Hi, I'm Akshay.
Hi, this is Saurabh, and you are listening to the Founder Thesis podcast. We meet some of the most celebrated startup founders in the country.
And we want to learn how to build a unicorn.
Hi, my name is Sanjay Bhatia. I'm co-founder and CEO of Freightwalla, which is a digital freight forwarding company.
When you buy that shiny new phone or a brand new television, some part of the money that you're paying for that product is actually going towards the cost of freight forwarding of that product. A lot of products we use in our daily life actually reach India through a shipping route on a container. And this was something we were all made painfully aware of during the Evergrande crisis. Despite being such a massive industry, in fact, it's projected to hit $200 billion globally soon, it is largely an unorganized sector in India where mom and pop operators, who my guest calls as briefcase wala agent, run the show. These agents essentially manage the requirements of their customers who are exporting or importing out of their briefcase. And this is where a company like Freightwalla comes in to make this whole process digital and seamless. Freightwalla was founded by Sanjay Bhatia, who, despite coming from a business family, never thought that he would end up being an entrepreneur. He was all set for a career in the VC space when the inspiration to start up hit him. Here's Sanjay talking about his journey. So, what was the thesis then that you started with? Like, you would have quit that job with some original thesis in mind. What was that?
The thesis was actually very simple, right? So if you look at importers and exporters in India today, right, and you look at the average state of India's logistics industry, I mean, even if you just try to shift houses, right, you've gotten some flavor of how organized the logistics players are, right? I mean, and you know how like painful it can be to interact with them. Now, imagine as an importer and exporter, you're doing some fairly complicated work, lots of documents to be filed. You have to file documents with customs saying, okay, I'm going to export such and such good. You have to coordinate with also the truck owner to get your cargo to the port, the ship owner to load your cargo on the ship, etc., etc. I mean, I'm not saying it's like rocket science, but it's a fairly complicated process.
Lots of moving pieces.
Lots of moving pieces. And the average quality of logistics provider you have, service provider you have to connect all of these services for you is not up to the mark, right? The existing providers are there's about the estimates vary for or what we would call a freight forwarder, which is the person who will connect all of these pieces for you. Estimates vary, then it could be anything from I think the lower bound of estimates I've heard of is that there's at least 15,000 freight forwarders in India right now, and on the upper end I've heard 27,000. So this is an incredibly fragmented market, and if you ever go into one of their offices, especially like some of the relatively small guys, and you see the way they operate, we have a saying in the industry, like, oh, he's a suitcase operator. What does a suitcase operator means? He has a suitcase with documents and he just bounces around and gets the work done. No office, no staff, nothing. Now that's obviously an extreme case. I'm not saying everyone is like that, but the fact that this term even exists is troubling. Like that should say something about the industry.
So this would have been like, say, the travel industry where you had tens of thousands of travel agencies pre-Make My Trip, like, where most of the people would buy from a travel agent who would maybe have one guy on ground in the destination who would make a package or would have a separate arrangement for bus, separate for plane and all that. So this industry is something akin to what the travel industry used to be.
Yeah, you can say it's similar, but there's one key difference here, right? So if you think of the travel industry, like just think of what the demand side of it looks like. So you have, let's say, a nation of 1 billion people, out of which maybe 100 million are using planes, right? Or maybe 50 million. I don't know the exact number, right? Now, the difference between the most active user, someone who's taking maybe 20 flights a year, and the one of the least active users, maybe one flight a year, right, or maybe one flight in 2 years. That scale difference is only about, depending on how we calculate, 20 to 40x. But in imports and exports, think of the smallest company and the largest company. You know, smallest company might do, like, let's say, one shipment per month, right? And the largest company might be doing 5,000 shipments a month. And there are companies who do even more than that. So the degree of fragmentation of demand over here and the recurring nature of the jobs is the two biggest differences between a standard make my trip model, which is like a simple marketplace platform where you just get connected with the airline, and that's it. Then make my trips job is done. Compared with our business, where the guy who's doing 5,000 shipments a month is not going to listen to you when if you go and tell him, hey, here's a platform, just book whatever you feel like. He'll say, no, I want special service. You want my 5,000 shipments? You do something extra for me.
Which is what these freight forwarding agencies would be doing. Like essentially, they provide that personalized, high touch kind of a service of taking care of all the handoffs, as being a single point of contact to manage all the handoffs.
That's the second, I think, the second part of it, which I was going to touch upon, which is that, also given the nature of the business where you have multiple touch points, you need someone who's actually going to ensure that it's seamless, right? So yeah, effectively these two things make for a different set of dynamics than a make my trip. Now, is it possible that a make my trip could exist in our industry? Yes, but then you are going for a certain layer of the market, right? You're going for the very ad hoc shipment layer, the people whose demand is very irregular, who don't want a dedicated provider, right? And you can go after this and it's fine, but it's just not a very large chunk of the market, because you then start applying the Pareto rule or the 80-20 rule and say that 80% of the volumes are going to be held with 20% of the most regular clientele. You can build that and it'll be a business, but how big can it get?
What are the various points of handoffs? Like, who are the various players whom a freight forwarding agency bundles? Like, a freight forwarding agency is essentially a bundler, right? So, what all is he bundling?
That, let's say you're an exporter, let's say your factory is in Gujarat and your buyer is in London.
And you're only targeting exporters or importers also?
We mostly do exporters.
Okay, got it.
Now, between the exporter and the overseas buyer, they'll agree on how to split up the responsibility of logistics. And the most typical way of splitting it is the guy in London will tell the Indian supplier, okay, you deliver till London port and then I'll take care of it from here. Okay. So that's called a CIF shipment.
What is CIF?
Cost, insurance, and freight. So the overseas buyer is paying for the cost of the goods, add some insurance into it, and the freight component, right, or the logistics component. This is one of the most common ways. There are many different ways of splitting the responsibility, but this is one of the most common ways. Now, in this, the Indian exporter's responsibility is to deliver till London. So his factory is in Gujarat, and he basically needs three basic services to be completed so he can deliver it to London, right? He needs a truck to get the cargo from Gujarat down to some seaport. Maybe it'll go to Hazira port in Gujarat. Maybe it'll come to Nhava Sheva port in Bombay. Then at the port, customs clearance is required because you need to file all the documents with the government telling them what you're exporting. Maybe you get some incentives for your exports, maybe not. And the third part is the freight, the ocean freight. So you need to organize the cargo being loaded on the ship and then take the ship going from, let's say, Mumbai port to London. And that is like your typical three services that a exporter would require, and all of these services can be bundled under freight forwarder. Again, I'm saying many different ways you could split it up. The guy could even the overseas buyer could even say that, no, I'm not going to do anything, you deliver until my door, and then the freight forwarder can help take care of that also. It's common to have door to door service, but it's not a prevalent form of operating in the industry.
Got it. Okay. So, and what was your thesis? So, you were talking specifically about the business model you selected.
Recognizing that the nature of demand of the industry, right, where there is a certain section of the 80-20 rule, right? There's a certain section of clients who control a vast majority of the overall trade, we started thinking like, okay, who are the people who, number one, will be okay with quality, relatively standardized service, and two, who still has sufficient, volumes that they can be, that they find that to be, they find international logistics to be a real challenge. And what we narrowed down was on the SME Indian exporters who are doing like, anywhere between, let's say, 5 shipments a month going up to a few hundred shipments a month. So the guys who are doing like the 5,000 plus, our take on that is, they've pretty much, they've been dealing with this, the hassles of.
So they would have an in-house team already, like they would already have in-house expertise to handle.
Exactly. They've been dealing with these hassles and challenges for a long time. So they've got some, good solution figured out. And people below that scale, below our band, are just so irregular that they don't actually even care enough, to look out for a better way of doing things. So that's how we ended up choosing these guys. And what we are offering to them is basically a far more efficient, standard, relatively standardized service delivered through automation and technology, right? So what is the main problem when you have a suitcase operator in our industry is that he's doing everything manually. It's a fairly complicated process. Again, not rocket science, but fairly complicated. And if you're doing a complicated process completely manually without any technology or process sophistication, you will make mistakes, guaranteed, right? And every mistake that he makes ultimately leads to either a cargo delay or a cost escalation for the exporter. In order to solve for this, we've got our, we figured out our demand, people who have sufficient volumes but not quite the scale to do everything in house. And our solution is automated service offering, which minimizes the hassles of international logistics, ultimately delivering to them better on time performance, right, of their cargo movements at a lower overall cost of logistics by cutting out the incidences of those errors in the process.
So, and when did your go-to market happen? Like, when did you launch the solution? Like,
Yeah, Jan 2017.
you would have essentially gone to these SME exporters and told them that we are a better freight forwarding agency as compared to the traditional option because we are digital. That would have been your pitch, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay. And how did you digitize the process? Like, what were the things that you did to make it more digital?
Okay, so on the process itself, there's, you can think of it as is broken up into two parts, right? So there's your pre-shipment tools, right, for getting further efficiencies, and then there's your post-shipment tools, which is basically mostly related to execution and tracking. So on the pre-shipment side, one thing you have to recognize, and this I think will sound similar to Make My Trip, but I sort of use that analogy with with a bit of a 10-foot pole. Like it sounds similar, but it's not exactly the same. So on that side, we have like a platform where you can come in, type up your requirements, right? Let's say you have cargo moving from Surat to London, using the same example. Now there's multiple different route options you can take, right? So you can, like I said, you can either bring the cargo down to Nhava Sheva port near Mumbai, or you can take it to Hazira port in the south of Gujarat. And each of those different ports, getting it there itself comes with different costs and different, timelines. Then at each of the different ports, you have different shipping line options. So different ships will carry it to London. Some of them may go direct, some of them may go indirect. In this particular example, everything goes direct, but that's not necessarily the case. It depends where exactly you're looking to move your cargo. And each of the ships also have different transit times, different costs associated with it, etc., etc. So when you are actually sitting there as a a SME exporter, you don't actually have the visibility into all of these things. If you are a very very dedicated exporter who has one buyer, or let's say a handful of buyers in just a few different countries, then you have a good sense, but you still don't have exact information. If you are the typical SME who's getting new orders from different places every now and then, you need to go and figure out all of these details, right? So we've got like this platform. You type up your requirements, you hit enter, and then all of the different route options with the associated costs, the schedules, the transit times, everything is delivered to you. Okay, so that's your pre-shipment side of things.
Got it, got it. So this is like the way on Make My Trip, you can put your from and to, and it will show you options like with one stop in between, with zero stops, and how many hours travel time, what cost, and stuff. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, again, right, it's similar, but then what happens thereafter is, like clients will typically have some follow-up questions, or they'll want to take care of few certain details or whatever, and that's where like the service aspect kicks in, right? So then they have someone dedicated who will walk them through all of their different options. The guys on our team who are taking care of making sure their shipments go smoothly, then they'll get involved, and then we'll figure out the right option for them, and then it moves forward to like the execution side, once everything is confirmed.
So how does things get confirmed? Do they pay something upfront? Like
No, no, no.
when does a lead become a customer?
A lead becomes a customer basically when we invoice them. I mean, they don't have to pay anything upfront, right? So the idea again over here is that we're not in it for the transaction, we're in it for the client. Most exporters, again, where the meaty chunk of the market have regular business. Every month they have multiple transactions. So
Okay. So there's a monthly settlement kind of a thing which happens. Like the industry norm is essentially not upfront, but like a monthly. That's like the industry norm, I guess.
yeah,
Okay. Hmm.
yeah. So then when we come to the down to the execution side of things, right? So then this is where really I feel like what we've really focused on as a company really begins to shine, right? So as I was mentioning to you earlier, we've put a lot of efforts into automating the process, recognizing that it is the manual errors that ultimately cause all of the frustration for the clients. You know, so if we can reduce the incidences of those manual errors, we know the clients are going to be happy and they're going to come back for repeat business. And as we get repeat business from multiple like mid-sized clientele, these SME clientele of reasonable scale, then we're going to build up our scales to such a degree that we're going to build a very large and profitable company. So our focus was on actually getting into the nitty gritties of the process, with a very fine tooth comb, trying to figure out where typically the process fails, right? When you're talking about regular operations, and then seeing what sort of technology interventions and automations can be brought into it to close those gaps and ultimately give the clients the sort of service that they desire, in terms of transparency of information, in terms of problem solving, in terms of proactive issue identification. Because I mean, logistics ultimately is a fairly messy business. Things do go wrong. Sometimes it goes wrong for no one's fault whatsoever. If you remember, I mean, I think last year in the middle of the first lockdown, the cyclone that came to Bombay literally knocked over one of the cranes at the port. I mean, what are you going to do? All of the efficiencies and planning of the world is not going to stop the cyclone from doing that. But then you need to start taking corrective actions very quickly, right? And that's where the technology begins to shine. Because if you're dealing with someone offline, this guy is not doing any tracking work whatsoever, right? He has no idea when things are going wrong. And what I have seen, in like Indian clients most complain about is that when something goes wrong, the logistics provider is not the one telling them that something's gone wrong. They find out from the overseas buyer who is tracking all of the cargo, and he'll say that, look, the cargo was supposed to arrive on the 1st of November, but now it's going to arrive on the 15th of November, and you didn't even inform me. That's what the overseas buyer will say, because they're used to very a different degree of professionalism. Then the Indian exporter will get really pissed off. He'll say, hey, shit, I'm losing reputation in front of my buyer. And he'll pick up his logistics provider and start yelling at him. Why didn't you tell me? I mean, Baba, how is he going to tell you? He doesn't know only it's happening, right? Because he doesn't have that he's not built those systems to take care of those problems. Yeah, I mean, in a way, you can boil down my motivation for all of this to a simple line. Like, I want to help make the whole Make in India campaign a reality, because I recognize that there's many things that we can improve on, and one of them is certainly the quality of India's logistics providers. Because if you have a logistics provider who's not giving you quality information, and you're an exporter and you have dreams of building a large export business, you can't do it unless you get someone who's giving you quality information, so that your buyer is not the one getting pissed off with you. That's ultimately what this is all about. So that's like a big driving factor for me. I want to make Indian exporters win.
Amazing. Tell me about post. So one is the onboarding experience, which you have digitized. Then once they get onboarded, then what is the automation or the digitization that's happening there? Like your responsibility would start from the trucking, right? Like getting the stuff loaded on a truck and transported to a port. So does that get digitized, or how does the custom clearance part get digitized? Like tell me about all these steps, like how you are digitizing them.
We recognize that logistics is a process driven industry, right? So step A, only once it's completed can you move to step B, and then step C, and then step D. Now in international logistics it starts getting quite complicated because you have two parallel streams that you have to work on. One is the physical movement of the cargo. So let's say it's coming down from Surat to Nhava Sheva port in Mumbai, and you have the documentation work stream, which is a separate one that can happen in parallel whilst the cargo is moving, and they interface with each other. So you can't prepare certain documents until the cargo reaches a certain physical location, and vice versa. So what we've done is we've identified this entire work stream that's there, right? And all of the interfacing points and all of the contingencies, and we started automating the flow of the shipment. Our software itself will start flagging the next steps that need to be done by the team and for the client as well. So if, like, let's say, like, the client has to submit a document without which the cargo is not going to be loaded on the ship. Now when you have an offline provider, this guy needs to keep track of whether the document is received or not.
Yeah, he needs to send a WhatsApp message or something, and
Yeah, or an email or a phone call. And if this guy is busy, I've actually seen cases where, the guy says, oh, no, no, my kid fell down in school. I had to rush to the school to pick him up and take him to the doctor. And because of that, some document filing wasn't done and the cargo was delayed at the port for 1 week. you know I'm not blaming this guy, but like these are the realities of the of dealing, of doing business. So when these situations happen, if this guy is not doing the work because of whatever reason, valid or non-valid reason, ultimately it's the exporter's cargo that's stuck. But for us, the software is the one who identifies what needs to be done, when it needs to be done by, which shipments are becoming critical, that if it's not done like ASAP, there's going to be extra charges or delays that are going to incur. And it is the one that is coordinating all of the different actions of all of the different parties to make sure that this cargo is ultimately loaded on the intended ship that it was supposed to be loaded on. Because the other thing about ship schedules is that, for most locations, you only get one ship a week from India, right? So if you miss it, your cargo is delayed by 7 days. Now, this is not a hard rule. There are locations that are serviced more than once a week, but as the rule of thumb, you can just basically say that if you miss it, it's delayed for 7 days.
right, okay. And but this information still gets fed in manually, like whether it was loaded or not.
No, so that's the back end integrations that we've done that pulls all of this information from the different systems.
So what are the systems you've integrated with, like to pull in information?
The port systems, container tracking systems.
Container tracking system is what? It's by the ship, or what does that refer to?
It depends, yeah. So the shipping line could have it separately, and then you could have, like, separate providers for that information as well.
But container typically refers to on the ship, like the container on the ship. So tracking that.
Container tracking is more than just the ship, right? So the vessel tracking is tracking the ship itself, but the container tracking can be like, supposing you're loading it on the railways, right? So it's coming from Delhi to Mumbai. You have RFID tags along that entire route as well, which will tag the container and say that, okay, the container has now passed Bhopal, and it's
Hmm, 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 hmm. So there are container companies who provide you this information. Like container is like this whole container service is run by a separate company or by the shipping company.
There are two separate companies that run this, right? So one will, for the domestic side, you got to interface with a different set of providers, who have the physical infrastructure on land. And for the ocean side of things, the shipping line can sometimes give you the land tracking as well, but not always. Mostly you will get ocean tracking from them. And then not all shipping lines have container tracking period. So then you have to start tracking the ship itself. And if you're getting conflicting information, then you need a tiebreaker. That's where the port systems come in. The data that's available right now, it's all there in silos. All of these guys have different like little pieces of data, but we found that quite often they conflict with each other because the quality of data is good but not 100%. So then you need to overlay your tracking solutions with your own business intelligence, to figure out what exactly is the status of that shipment at any given point in time.
Hmm. These containers are owned by whom? Are there companies which own containers and they lease it out to ships or railroads or whatever? Or do shipping companies own their containers? Or
The shipping companies typically will give the container to you. How do they get it? They lease it from someone else.
okay, so there would be like these containers available in every city, and where you either rent the whole container or a part of the container, and you rent it from point A to point B. That point A again, so like we gave that example from Gujarat to UK, for example. So you would rent a container from Gujarat to UK and utilize it for getting your stuff there, or you would rent it partly. Like that could also happen.
That could also happen. So if you want to do a full container rental, right, that's like your standard full container load shipment, which is what most reasonable scale exporters have. Of course, it depends industry to industry. Some industries have a cargo which is not very voluminous, like it's not very big.
Like jewelry.
Yeah, like jewelry will go air freight, but something like that, where like let's say electronics and cell phones, right? If you're ordering a small batch, then you don't need the whole container, because you'll get like 50 lakhs of goods in a very small amount of, yeah, like few hundred kilos of cargo, so they'll book a space inside a container. But yeah, so you can do that. That is a different set of service providers you have to deal with. Full container loads is a different set of service providers. Air freight is a different set of service providers. So the complications ramp up pretty quickly.
Hmm. Yeah, so and you are integrated, like you are bundling all of these. You are bundling the container providers, the truck which will carry the container. So there'll be a truck on which the container gets loaded, and the truck takes that to the port. So that also you bundle in. And okay, got it.
Yeah, right now we're doing all ocean freight services.
Okay, and how do you know if it cleared the custom or not? Again, there's a way to get that data.
Yeah, the customs site is called IceGate.
So, how much of this is still manual work? Like, do you need people on the ground in the custom office to get the files passed? Like, I'm just picturing like a government office where there is somebody who's smoothing the way for the file. Is that what happens, or?
Well, honestly, much less than you imagine, right? I think what is really commendable is the way that the customs department has moved a lot of these processes online and made it fairly seamless. So, the those cases that you're talking about are only if you have a specific hardcore incentive for someone to smooth things over.
Okay, okay, okay. So, but the document submission, all of that is online. So, someone can upload the document to your platform, and then you will further upload it to the customs authority through a direct integration. And
Yeah, all of the document submission now, I think pretty much throughout the chain is pretty much online. I'm sure in certain odd cases there are instances where you have to go and make physical submissions and do some physical follow up work, but those are specialized and sensitive cargoes, which is not the majority of the industry.
And how do the commercials work in this industry? Like, is there a cost plus margin, or is there like a flat amount that you charge and there is a markup inside that, or like how does it work?
Yeah, so we work on a sort of flat fee basis. That also helps in establishing the transparency with the end client, which is something that we are very, particular about as a company. Transparency of information flow, transparency of pricing, transparency of when there is a problem, transparency of how it can be solved. We really recognize that we are, ultimately custodians of someone else's cargo, and key enablers, in their growth, or if you're not doing a good job, then there's stagnation as well.
Hmm. Yeah. So what does that mean? Flat fees? Like if someone says I want to move something from Gujarat to UK, then you'll say, okay, this is the cost of transportation plus this is our flat fees.
Yeah. So it's flat fee per service used. So if you're doing customs clearance and trucking and ocean freight, then it's the same flat fee multiplied by three per service.
Got it. And typically people will like do online payments or like they send a check to you, or like how does that operate?
Yeah, bank transfers. Again, we're dealing in that sort of scale of company where things are regimented and process driven. So you can consider us to be a B2B business. We don't focus on that very tiny type of company. Like I said, the guys who have very ad hoc shipments. So the ones who have regular shipments have their regular processes against it, and typically that involves bank transfer.
Let's talk about your funding journey. So you said you launched it in January 2016, right?
2017.
2017, January 2017. Okay. So and when did you raise your first round of funds?
Yeah, first round of funds was raised May 2018. Yeah, so that's the little over a year's bootstrapping. That was from K Capital, who I think they've got some pretty good investments across the country. I think their most notable recent one, which has done really well, is Zetworks. Of course, we're hoping to follow in their footsteps soon. But other than that, K Capital also has other good companies like Healthcart, InMobi, Mintra, etc.
So by that time, by May 2018, what had been like your, like how big had you become? Like what were the number of transactions happening, or what was your revenue run rate by that time? Like give me an idea of the growth from Jan 2017 till that fundraise round.
Yeah, but from Jan 2017 to about May 2018, we grew about 30x
In what terms? Like in the top line, in the
in the number of shipments.
okay. How many shipments were you doing then? Like May 2018?
So by May 2018, we were doing about 30 shipments a month, roughly, right? And these are for, again, like those B2B type clients. We had just about gotten established in a way. And then we closed the round with them, and then obviously the money that comes in really allows you to turbocharge. So
Hmm. How much did you raise in that round?
it was about 800K US dollars. So if you're looking at INR, it's about 5.5 crores.
And yeah, so you were telling me how you use those funds.
Yeah, so I mean, the funds basically went into ramping up the team. So there was logistics professionals in to take care of operations. Started ramping up the technology team for all of the technology development, all of like the features that we had planned. We got a sales team together to start driving the business. One thing that is noteworthy about that time is how nascent the startup ecosystem in India was. There was a lot of different sort of additional forms of financing that we were looking out for. Scaling a logistics business, especially freight forwarding business, is not necessarily like very equity heavy.
Why is that? Like,
Well, I mean, there's two forms of. I mean, okay, think of it this way, right? So you're a freight forwarding business. Your role is to coordinate the movement of cargo, right? You don't actually own any of the assets. Your main expenses is building up your technology platform. Now you can plow as much money as you want into that, depending on your plans. But ultimately, it's not the sort of business that requires, like $50 million. Like if you're starting, like for example, a neo bank or something, you just need a huge amount of upfront capital. So freight forwarding is just not that kind of business. But where do you need the money, right? So let's say since it's a B2B transaction, you need your clients might ask for some amount of credit, you know and back to back, you may or may not get that credit from your suppliers. So you additionally need working capital financing, right? And if you have your working capital financing, then you're pretty sorted. Your growth is fairly unlimited. And for us, the in 2018, all of these venture debt funds and all of these guys, like, they were just coming up. you know NBFCs didn't really look at startups whatsoever. Banks, so forget about it. um, so that entire piece of the business or ecosystem was quite nascent. So that was something that we look back on, and now when we see where we are today, and what sort of services and facilities we're able to arrange for in terms of different forms of financing. I think like the last 3 years I've seen incredible growth on that side of the startup ecosystem, which is really commendable. 3 years, such a big turnaround, it's amazing. So the money was deployed for those three main areas, and then of course, as I mentioned, a little bit went towards working capital as well.
What has been the growth since then? Since you raised that first fundraise in May of 2018.
Yeah, I mean it's been pretty incredible. So as of right now, I think we have more than 400 clients who are onboarded with us, regularly interacting. Teams also grown like exceptionally well. So I think we've grown 10x. We were at that time, barely 8-9 people as a company. We're right now, close to 100, and still ramping up. There's a lot of vacancies that we're looking to close. And along with that also, I would say like the size of the clientele that we're able to approach is also getting larger. I think we're getting recognition now from some proper large conglomerates for the work that we're able to do, and rather than us approach them, they're beginning to approach us, which is very heartening. Yeah.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. Okay. What is your customer acquisition strategy? Like, is it like cold emails, cold calling, and stuff like that, or like?
No. So in terms of customer acquisition strategy, we're very focused on who are the sorts of industries and clientele who would two things. One, most struggling with the current state of the industry, right? And therefore, number two, the most amenable to changing the way that they currently operate. And on those fronts, we basically identified industrial goods, chemicals, furniture, those sorts of companies. Your sort of semi-finished and finished goods companies who are the most in need of an upgrade in the way that they currently operate. Now, within that, also, obviously, we have further qualification criteria. It depends on the team size. It depends on how many people that the uh, client has who is operating logistics. Like for example, I remember we had once gone to this chemicals company who, in that sense, sort of fits our bucket. But when we asked them, how many people they have operating their logistics, even though they weren't a very large company, they said they have 12 people. 12 is a phenomenally large number of people to operate logistics. And we basically figured out like, this guy's not going to be like very interested, and we dropped him pretty soon. Like we stopped the pursuit. So we have a fairly long list of qualification criteria, but ultimately it comes down to just few segments, few industries that we've identified as being the most amenable to an upgrading because of the way that they currently operate.
Hmm. But how do you acquire them?
Yeah, it's a mix. So we have inbound clientele as well, through all of our sort of digital marketing and PR efforts and et cetera, et cetera, brand building efforts. So people who are looking for something better will find us. They'll get in touch with us. They'll sign up on our platform, and then we'll start engaging with them. And then for certain targeted industries where we see a very strong fit, we will go out and approach them as well.
Okay. And what is your pitch to a company? Essentially, it's like transparency, or is there also a price advantage?
There is a price advantage. The price advantage itself will improve as we ourselves scale up, because then we start getting better, operating efficiency ourselves, which we can then pass on to the clientele. But our primary pitch right now is improving the way that their current logistics is functioning, right? Like all of the hassles and the daily headaches that they take when trying to move cargo across borders, we are basically stepping in there and saying, hey, if you use us, the technology reduces the hassles. We ourselves are a very knowledgeable team, with expertise in how to do these things, and we can really lighten your load, right? And for an SME, which is quite often owner driven, he doesn't want to be involved in sorting out logistics and also dealing with his overseas buyers for new business. I always tell my team, like the ideal scenario is that the client never calls us because that means everything is going smooth, and they never have to call us, they never have to speak to us, and that's perfect. That's what makes them happy, and that's when we know we've done a good job.
Hmm. Are these SME promoters willing to transact purely online, like look at stuff online and see what is the status, and are they willing to do that, or do they still need a voice on the other end with whom they can speak?
Yeah, I mean, they do need a voice, but not in the way that it becomes a burden. So what they are looking for is a little bit of extra assurance and a little bit of problem solving. But when it comes to like the actual transaction and just the day to day functioning, I think it's pretty okay. They don't mind using the platform because again, they recognize all of the benefits that flow from there, right? So the SME owners are definitely like they're absolutely fine with it. The challenge comes when you are not dealing with the owner of the company, but you're dealing with someone more down the line, because then over there, then it's no longer about what's best for the company. It's about what's best for that individual, and that then introduces other complications on how we are going to interact with them.
Maybe that person would have been receiving a kickback previously or stuff like that.
Yeah, that is certainly possible. The other thing to think about is what is their KPI. If they've been incentivized to, do A, B, or C, right? Which, you might go to them and say that, look, if you pursue A, B, and C, that's a very short term minded approach. And, in the long term, you'd rather do X, Y, Z. And X, Y, Z is better for the company. They're just going to be like, yeah, but I get money for A, B, C, So, to hell with it. And those additional complications then start you know complicating the entire approach.
So, how big is this market? The market that you are addressing. What is your addressable market size like?
Yeah, it's a pretty big market. I mean, India has about $300 billion worth of $313 billion, if I remember the numbers correctly. 2019 merchandise exports from India, right? There's a very simple way to size this market, right? So let's say there's $313 billion of exports from India. I'm sure you would have heard of that stat, right? That everyone's heard of. Like logistics is 13% of India's GDP. So a simple way to size the market is say that okay, forget 13%. Let's just take 10%. Let's say logistics is 10% as a percentage of the cargo value, right? So you got $313 billion of exports. Apply a 10% rule. So the logistics spend on exports should be around 31.3 billion. Now on this, you can start doing some further calculations about which specific subsegment you want to go after. Another very common stat is that SMEs make up about 50 to 70% of India's logistics. So you use that multiplier, and then you come to around 15 to around $21 billion SME logistics spend in India on international exports. So that's like essentially the market that we're going after. It's very sizable.
And what would be your revenue potential from this spend?
Yeah, so from this, I think you just have to subtract from this. Let's say $21 billion. You then just subtract away, at least for the moment, those extremely small clientele, right? Where I said the ad hoc business, and that would be no more than let's say 20%, the long tail. So 21 billion less 20%, you're at around 16 billion.
How much would the freight forwarding agency business be worth, like from that perspective?
Maybe another 10% on this, 10 to 20%.
Okay. So 10% of this, about some 18-20 billion.
Yeah, I mean, I just did that math, but I don't necessarily agree with the calculations and the logic behind it. But yeah,
Okay. And so, what is the path for you to become a unicorn? Like, what do you see as your roadmap over the next couple of years?
yeah. I mean, so we're gonna what we have in mind is to ramp up our core business. We are now few years ago we had the intentions of becoming a pan India player, which to a large degree we have succeeded in. We can now take care of shipments from any part of the country to overseas. and vice versa. The path to unicorn is to basically just ramp up on our current sales focus, then start adding in air freight, warehousing as well, right? So start eating into more aspects of the overall value chain, and that all combined should lead to a $1 billion business, fairly easily. And then post that, I mean, honestly, I guess one of the beauties of being involved in international logistics is that we fully recognize that the problems that we have discussed today about how Indian exporters and importers struggle, uh, they largely hold true for other parts of Asia as well. And I think other parts of Asia also have. I mean, it's not like they also have like 20 different digital forwarders that are coming up. So there is market share to be seized over there as well. So some maybe a couple of years down the line, we fully see the internationalization of this company as a very distinct possibility, and that again it just adds to the market size, adds to the revenue potential. And Southeast Asia, actually, we may think of them as like smaller countries, but they are much more internationally exposed, much more connected with global supply chains. So we did some rough back over here. We actually looked into the numbers in a decent amount of detail, and I think market size for Southeast Asia international logistics is about 4 times the size of India, even though these are theoretically tinier countries, right?
No, I mean, Bangladesh would be a good first country to go into, right? Like the physical proximity is there, and they also have a large export reliance.
Yeah, I mean, there is a very clear case for entering Bangladesh. They do a lot of exports to the USA, especially textiles. That's, I guess, what they're known for globally now. So yeah, I mean, broader South Asia and Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm. By when do you think you'll cross 100 million annual revenue, $100 million?
Maybe a couple of years.
Maybe 2025 or something like that.
2024. Yeah.
Ah, nice, amazing. You said that you're at about 100 people today. So tell me about scaling up a team. Like you obviously prior to this did not have that experience of running such a large organization. So what were the learnings that you got along the way? What were the mistakes you made, and what did you learn from them?
Yeah, I think primary learning for me was the ability to let go, and not having to do everything myself, which a little counterintuitive, because you recognize that scaling a team is important, which I think we personally, I also recognize that scaling a team was important, but when it came down to like critical decisions or something, I found it very hard to let go. So when it came down to like few very important things, I was always looking to try and do it myself or be heavily involved in it. And then over time, I think this is, like I said, this is my primary learning, right? So the over time I realized that that's good. I mean, you might be able to perfect that one particular decision, but then if it wasn't as major, if it wasn't like an earth shattering decision, the efficiency loss was actually tremendous. And it actually meant that you could do less things overall. That was like one of the major things, like learning to delegate. And with that, a second learning related to this, just how to identify a good leader, because as a company continues to scale, beyond the founders, you need additional leaders as well, and identifying those leaders is, in the logistics industry, fairly challenging.
Do you I mean, there are two schools of thoughts. One says that that talent is fungible, that you don't need someone from logistics if the person has, for example, good leadership skills. And a lot of startups do that. They would hire people, let's say, from consulting companies, because they know these are smart kids, so to say. So is that your preferred approach, or do you place value on experience, that experience in the industry is important?
So I'll tell you where we were historically, and I'll also admit that, at the moment we are thinking harder and deeper about this problem. But where we were historically was that as a very young company, the only way that we were going to scale up to even where we are today is with people who actually know what the business is. Because remember, it's not a simple business. It's not like buying and selling chewing gum, right? It's like you get from one place and you sell to the other. there is domain expertise required to even do one transaction decently, right? So our preference in the initial phases was always about, get the guy who knows how to do the job, because you don't have time to sit and train someone on like the intricacies of international logistics for 6 months. You may not have that much runway as a company, right? When you're a startup. So you can't afford to take time to scale those guys up. So that's where we were historically. And we took people from the logistics industry. It helped us. They were at least able to take care of day to day and allowed the founders to focus on, more tactical and strategic decisions rather than day to day operations. Though, of course, being a startup, you also do get dragged into day to day quite often. So that's where we were historically. Now, in terms of fungible leadership talent, I would say that for us as a company, and I don't want to talk about make any grand proclamations about what I feel for like all startups all over the place. I'll just speak about our company. I think for us that fungibility of leadership talent is a distinct possibility once there is sufficient amounts of domain expertise already available in the company that can take care of things, so that your fungible talent when it comes in is either not taken for a ride by his own juniors, and also has enough of structure and support to actually be able to execute on the promise and talent that they have. So I think that's where we stand. And yeah, as I mentioned to you, whereas historically we would mostly take people from the industry, now I think, with these pointers in mind, we are much more flexible.
Okay. So, okay, yeah. I want to understand more about who else is there in this digital freight forwarding industry. You said you were like one of the first in this market, and then subsequently more people came in. So, what does this market look like today?
Yeah, so I mean, over time, there were, I think, maybe 5 or 6 entrants into the broader freight forwarding industry. Now, given the level of domain expertise that's required, I think what has happened almost by default is that each player has found his own niche within this industry, you know. So, there's us who's trying to be a digital freight forwarder primarily for exporters. Then there is the other player who's trying to build the technology stack and a SaaS offering for the end client, the importer or the exporter. There's another guy who's building a technology stack for the freight forwarding companies. So everyone has come in recognizing that the industry is, in desperate need of, better, or of something better. But then through time, we've all sort of found these individual niches in which to sit. Where I think most of the guys in the industry, wherever they're sitting, are pretty much the only guys in that space, which goes to show just how heavy on domain expertise this industry is. That there are only so many players, but at the flip side, it's good for everyone because everyone has their niche and has freedom to roam and grow and develop in that space.
Mm-hmm. So, are you also looking at a SaaS offering, because you have built a software which currently is for in-house use, but that itself could be a product to give out to larger companies?
I mean, we're contemplating, how we can further leverage the technology that we've already built out. But we have no concrete agenda just yet.
But what is the way you're thinking about it? Like, what are the pros and the cons of it?
One way that we look at this is that if we disperse or SaaSify our product, if that's a word, I'm not sure if it is. um, but yeah, if we SaaSify our product, one way of thinking about it is that hey, there's a little bit of secret sauce here that we've got, in terms of how we've automated these internal processes, and then you give it out, and it should come with a significant amount of earnings with it. And the thing about SaaS products is we're not very confident that there is a very large market for a SaaS solution in our space. A specific SaaS solution for international logistics. So that is something we're thinking about. But on the flip side, it does help in furthering the brand recognition and potentially expanding the reach. So those are the two thought processes that we're juggling with right now, with no clear answer of how we are going to roll this forward.
Would that additional data give you better decision making capability? Like if you were to open it out to companies and companies started feeding their data into it, would that make your system smarter? Like better machine learning happening and stuff like that?
Yes, and that would be like one of the arguments on the pro side.
You told me that the path to becoming a unicorn is partly by expanding this range of services and partly by going expanding the geography. So let me ask you about both of these. So for expanding the range of services, are you looking at acquisitions as the path to do that, or would you want to organically build it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think both are definitely on the cards, depending on the scale and the timing. But at the moment, we're pretty comfortable doing this organically, and we're looking at having our first overseas office set up within the next year itself.
Wow.
To start ramping that up.
Which country have you finalized?
Mostly Dubai.
This episode of Founder
Amazing.
Thesis podcast is brought to you by Long Haul Ventures. Long Haul Ventures is the long haul partner for founders and startups that are building for the long haul. More about them is at www.longhaulventures.com.